we ended off right with this conflict theory argument that basically, when it comes to crime, the rich and the powerful are the ones who define what crime is, and they do so for their own benefit. So the things that they do are either less punished or not made criminal at all. All right, so that's where we left it off. And I promised you that we would talk about control theory, right? Okay, so control theory comes from this kind of conflict theory scholar named Travis Hirschi. And basically what Hirschi says is it's obvious that the rewards for being a criminal are ample, right? That, this adage that crime doesn't pay is stupid. Actually, crime pays extremely well. Otherwise, no one would do it, right? But why do people not engage in deviance and crime if they can get away with it? That people would engage in deviance and crime if they could get away with it. And that what then kind of makes people not engage in it is the fact that it would put a lot of their social connections at risk, right? That basically people internalize control of themselves, right? They follow the rules basically because they have different levels of social bonds, right? So the degree to which people are prevented from violating norms varies, and laws accounts for the variance in levels of crime and deviance, right? Some things are more deviant than others and therefore come with greater social consequences. You put more at risk if you commit certain crimes than others, and therefore, most people will never commit crimes, and some crimes, so most people will never commit crimes because it puts too much at risk. The crimes that do get committed are the ones that put the least at risk, typically. Okay, so basically, Hirschi says there are kind of 4 kinds of social control. Sorry, go ahead. Would this explain crimes like manslaughter? Potentially, right? You're putting a lot of your social bonds at risk with manslaughter, right? Because you could theoretically be excluded from a lot of the normal parts of social life, right? Because you killed someone. But let me go through the 4 parts, and then maybe that'll make sense. Okay, so there's 4 kinds of social control, right? So basically, people will protect their social bonds and their kind of social opportunities, and therefore not commit most crimes, right? So number 1 is social attachments, right? 2, people you care about and respected role models, right? If you commit a crime, there's a chance that people that you care about within the community, people that were your mentors, people that are role models, parents, family, teachers, etc., may not want to have anything to do with you, right? So you're putting your social attachment to people whose opinions you care about in danger by committing crime, right? Because if people find out that you're deviant in that way, they may ultimately want to dissociate from you. From legitimate opportunities for education and good jobs, right? Theoretically, especially if you get convicted of a criminal offense, right? This puts the possibility of, getting a good job in particular at serious risk. So people will protect the possibility, right, of being able to go to school, of getting teachers to help you, all of these sorts of things by basically staying away from deviance, right? Because if you are in that deviant category, chances are you could lose a lot of those opportunities. Your involvement in kind of conventional social institutions, right, can also be put at risk, right? Whether this is community organizations, school, work, religious congregations, or anything like that, all of this can be put in jeopardy, if your level of deviance goes too far, and certainly if you are, say, convicted of a crime, right? People might shun you and not want to have anything to do with you. And then beliefs in traditional values and morality, right? People are fundamentally kind of at their core mostly incapable of believing that their actions are somehow bad or evil. Again, not always, but in large measure. So for the most part, what happens is, basically if you, become deviant, you have to sort of put aside kind of traditional values and morality in favor of your own. So you're putting your kind of adherence to what is, typical of your society kind of at risk by becoming deviant or criminal, right? That basically at the end of the day, it becomes a problem for you. I will say, I think I have the Slido working on my laptop and I'm going to be patching through. So if you want to, you can ask questions by raising your hand. Certainly, if you want to ask them through the Slido, I do have it running as well. I don't know if it'll show up on the screen here. So hopefully that makes sense, right? Basically, you're putting your kind of social world in jeopardy by becoming deviant, right? And you can lose a lot of the relationships and opportunities that are important to you. Yeah.
Sorry, for like the reward though, with manslaughter, would the reward be like the ability to be neglectful, or because it's like the reward?
I'm thinking more in terms of crime, like, when we think about like theft, bank robbery, I guess like eliminating your rivals might be one of the rewards of something like murder or manslaughter, right? Or the ability to take revenge, right? We were just talking about Tupac the other day and how he probably died just out of a simple grudge, right? People will kill people just to take revenge for a perceived slight. I guess that would be more the reward when we're talking about, slaughtering someone. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. All right, 2 laptops at once, go. Okay, so, social control and regulation. Basically, social control, when we talk about social control, it's the ways that the social system, right? So basically society and all of its rules tries to regulate people's thoughts, feelings, appearance, and behaviors. Now, this can take kind of 2 forms. Internal social controls, which regulates your behavior and mine and everyone's through socialization, right? So, this is Foucault, right? This is the panopticon in a sense. This is you internalize the means of your own repression, right? Why don't you enter deviance? Why don't I run that red light at 3 a.m, when I'm coming home and the intersection is empty? Because I've internalized, that social control, right? No one is exerting it on me, but I've been socialized, things like being polite, right? Things like, not committing certain crimes. When I don't do them not because I think someone's going to punish me, because I know it's wrong, then it's an internal social control. External social controls, right, are those that are imposed from outside. Typically, we think of this, especially in conflict theory terms, external social controls come in when internal social controls have failed, right? Then, basically you follow the rules because you're of a fear of being punished, or, actual punishment and the offering of rewards, right? So it's like the, carrot and stick kind of model. It's like you'll behave because, you're worried about the punishment and because you might get a reward for behaving, but there's a sort of external kind of quality to it. Okay, degree of social control and its form vary from time, between time and place. And that, this is kind of obvious, right? Different societies at different times have different forms of social control, right? Now, one of the things that's generally noted is that pre-industrial societies are noted for strict social controls and high conformity. And this makes sense, right? Typically in pre-industrial societies, people were living in relatively small communities, right? And Durkheim notes this, right? That the kind of model is the medieval village, right? Where everybody knows each other, right? So really strict social control in those circumstances, because, technically I think this is post-industrial, but just barely. Think about like the novel, The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, right? The woman gets caught in adultery and she's branded with a big scarlet A on her that she has to wear on her clothing for the rest of her life because she's an adulteress, right? This would be the kind of model that we're thinking of, right? Social control, right? She committed adultery. Now she gets shunned for the rest of her life. And, everybody sort of stays very conformist because there's real social consequences that come with misbehavior. As we get to bigger kind of, industrialization, but particularly what comes with industrialization, which is big urban centers that are very diverse, what we find is typically less stringent social controls. Why? Because people don't know each other, right? You might not know your neighbors. You're going to walk down the street and see a bunch of strangers with whom you have essentially no relationship. And so there's not a lot, if I pass you all in the street, and maybe I remember some of your faces, maybe I don't. It's unlikely that your, gazes as I wear my furry costume on my way to the furry convention is going to do, I've got the head under my arm so it's me. It's doubtful that your social gaze and social control is going to affect my behavior because I don't know you and I don't care what you have to say. If I was, however, in a medieval village, different story, right? Because I would know everybody. And so if I'm acting weird, everybody's going to shun me and punish me and gossip about me. But in industrial societies, because communities get so large, there's little social control and generally pretty low conformity, right? Which is why you get more kind of types of, especially kind of, low-level social deviation and social diversion in kind of industrial societies, right? Because there's a lot of range that people can go to, and there's not a lot of social control at the end of the day. Okay. Maybe I hadn't talked about the panopticon yet. I'm like, oh, I thought I had already mentioned this earlier in the course. But okay, whatever. In a book called Discipline and Punish, right, Foucault comes up with this model of what he thinks industrial society looks like in terms of control, right? So a little bit different from, that kind of functionalist definition that I had on the last slide. Foucault, coming from this kind of postmodern view, basically says that, in some respects, social control has actually increased over time, and especially in industrial and he calls it like post-surveillance societies, we have more social control, right? So individuality and deviance may have increased, but they do so within strict limits, right? There are strict bounds to what's allowed in an industrial society or a postmodern society in terms of what you can do. But increasingly, right, things are managed by a surveillance state, right, where everything is monitored, right, where your old tweets could be brought up and used against you later on. And you're expected to discipline yourself considerably more. Foucault calls this biopolitics, right? But that's, go take contemporary social theory if you want to learn about biopolitics, because that's way beyond the realm of SOS 100. The metaphor that Foucault uses for modern societies, and he's thinking of things like, in modern societies, people follow the rules even though they probably won't get caught. And increasingly, right, they police even their own bodies in ways, right? Like, so why do you see a bunch of people at the gym on any given day? Well, because for Foucault, he thinks everybody is kind of given an imperative by capitalism and by the nation state to, keep yourself physically fit so that you can be a good worker and potentially a good soldier for the capitalist nation state if it happens to need you to. So he thinks the model of industrial society is what he calls a panopticon, right? And here, I've got a picture which is sort of someone's built what a panopticon would kind of look like. But it's this model of a prison that's taken from this English philosopher named Jeremy Bentham. And Bentham, thinking of how to reform the prison, basically suggested that at the end of the day, the best prison would be one where the prisoners essentially keep themselves disciplined through their own kind of internalized means. And so, basically what he said, the best prison would be round, right, and have all of these cells where you could see into them. And in the middle of the prison, you would have a tower. Right? Now the tower, not like this one's a little derpy, but it would be like a structure where there would be windows, but the windows would be shaded in such a way that the people in the cells would never be able to tell if they were being observed, right? And so what Foucault says is this is the model of society, right? Everybody, especially once you get CCTV cameras and, you're carrying around, by your own free will, and you paid a lot of money for it, your own tracking device. So the government and telecom companies know where you are at any given moment. You're carrying your own tracker. So because this is the sort of model of industrial society, right, we're all being observed all the time, but we never know when that might matter, right? And so, you never know when that CCTV camera might catch you doing something you're not supposed to be doing, when your cell phone records might be used against you, when your tweet from 10 years ago, might be used to prove that you don't, fit current social values or whatever. So it encourages, according to Foucault, people to self-discipline and self-censor in major ways and reduce their kind of levels of deviance, right? Because you never know what, I think of this like where people have had 10-year-old tweets dug up, or they liked, they hit like the heart on a tweet, right? And people are like, oh my gosh, that person liked this tweet. Are they a Nazi or whatever, right? You've seen these kind of controversies spring up all the time. As we're more surveilled, as there's more ways to know about people, Foucault says we all discipline more and we actually become more conformist, even though, it looks like there's more individuality and deviance. It's within really kind of strictly, strict bounds, right? Not everything is allowed. Purple hair allowed, MAGA hat not allowed. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, gotta remember to tab forward. The medicalization of deviance. We talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the course with Foucault as well. in that first unit on concepts and theories. But increasingly, right, what used to be defined as kind of morally bad is now defined as sort of sickness, right? So here, probably the classic example is something like ADHD, right? ADHD, or attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, which used to be like, mostly attributed to boys who were extremely precocious, right? So maybe misbehaved a lot in class, acted out, were very energetic. It used to be seen as a kind of moral failing, right? That these were just bad kids or kids that needed to learn self-control, right? They were poorly raised. Increasingly, though, right, it has been medicalized, right? So now instead of being, just like, oh, that kid needs to learn how to self-discipline, it's like, oh, they have ADHD. We need to give them, Ritalin or Vyvanse or some other stimulant or ADHD medicine. So increasingly, right, especially as the reign of psychology, my favorite discipline and yours, has become sort of more encompassing of deviance, especially, and it's become medicalized. More and more things that used to be seen as willful are now seen as involuntary, right? And things that don't need so much punishment as treatment. And I think this is the story of a lot of behavioral issues, right? Anxiety, again, used to be seen as a sort of moral flaw. Now is seen in a much more medicalized way, right? So yeah, as the definition of deviance changes, deviance now I think is increasingly under the sway of the medical and psychiatric establishments. I mean, there's even a school of thought, and I was just reading about this the other day in philosophy, that says basically people have no free will, right? So that your deviance, like if you commit a murder or you rob a bank, that you actually, because you're just a biological machine, you don't have any free will. And so ultimately, what we should do is not punish you, but treat you. Try to treat the kind of, underlying conditions you have that might have led you towards deviance at the end of the day. All righty. Yeah, nothing is showing up there, but I see it on my computer. Is this lecture being recorded? Yes, I have it recorded. It's on now. I might have stopped a little bit too late. Okay, that comment is about Tupac. Were Nazis a subculture since they had dominant? No, Nazis were definitely not. They might have started out as a subculture, but were definitely, they progressed later on. Okay. Yeah, okay, I did talk about Foucault's prison earlier. Okay, perfect. Now you can't see the question, so it's less entertaining. It's probably a good thing. Okay, yeah. So in terms of mental disorders, right, there are definitely more mental disorders that are kind of on the books than there were in the past, right? So yeah, if we look at the mid-19th century, right, so the middle of the 1800s, around 1850, basically, when it came to kind of mental disorders, idiocy and insanity were the basic mental disorders that people talked about, right? Today, right, the DSM-5, which came out in 2013, lists 294 mental disorders. And again, that's not saying that these are not mental disorders. Foucault would say that the insidious gaze of the doctor has kind of split apart the human mind and human behaviors and created more disorders. But, basically, we've become, the point is more that, according to Foucault, it's fallen under the control. The question of deviance has fallen more and more under the control of psychology and medicine, so that now psychology and medicine lists, almost 300 types of medical disorders. And the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders put out by the American Psychological Association. It's the sort of go-to guide for what is a mental disorder. Okay, yeah, I mean, more people are now experiencing more stress than ever before and reporting more mental disorders. And, as people have kind of split off from traditional institutions, right, we see people less and less able to deal with things in a kind of social way and more disorders kind of coming about. I mean, especially like now, if we're looking at, say, young people, we're seeing rates of mental illness rise really precipitously. To get a real detail of that, come take Sociology of Youth with me in the winter, and we'll talk about it in great detail. Yeah, cultural context also plays a role in the number and scope of mental disorders. If you go to a lot of places in the world, even things like depression, like, certain parts of sub-Saharan Africa, if you told someone that you're depressed, they'd look at you kind of funnily. they wouldn't understand what you're talking about because it's simply not within the kind of cultural realm that they think about, right? Depression is not a cultural kind of concept that they would understand. It's something that does come out of sort of late modern society where, everything has been sort of medicalized in major ways. Okay. So I think as I talked about, when we talked about socialization, prisons are powerful agents of socialization, right? Being total institutions. People often undergo re-socialization when they are in prison. Excuse me. So what happens when you go to prison, right? You're re-socialized. New inmates often become more serious offenders as they adapt to the culture of the most hardened criminals. One of the reasons, especially now, that we try to keep people out of prison, again, I think I mentioned this when we talked about socialization, like the Youth Criminal Justice Act, the youth justice legislation in Canada, basically says that like most young people, especially non-violent and non-serious offenders, should be diverted out of the criminal justice system, right? Why? Because prisons are a sort of criminal university. You go to prison, you study under Professor, McStabby. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what a good prison professor name would be. McRobbie. McSteely. Whatever. Let's drop that particular convention. Right. And you learn the tricks of the trade and you build social relationships with other criminals, right? Yeah. When societies became more industrialized, imprisonment became one of the more important forms of punishment for criminal behavior, but it wasn't so in the past, right? In a lot of cases in the past, punishments were done in the town square. It would have been only really serious political prisoners that were kept in prisons, and there wasn't like the massive, prison system that we have today, right? What's sometimes called the prison industrial complex is really comes out of the growth of modernity and this idea that, people who are deviant need to be separated from society in serious ways. All right. So why do we incarcerate people, right? There's basically four main ideas why we should put people in prison, right? The first one, and probably the one that happens, I would say, the least often, is the opportunity for rehabilitation, right? That you put people in prison and hopefully you can break the cycle that happened to get them put in prison in the first place, right? So you would offer them education, probably treatment for drug and alcohol issues, maybe counseling. Now, this does happen in prisons for sure. And I know my boss, Sandra Bucerius, who runs the kind of criminology center here, she's had lots of experience talking to people who basically, when they knew they'd hit the end of the line, right, their addiction had gotten out of hand, they go commit a crime so that they would get thrown into prison because they knew in prison they could get treatment for their drug addictions, right? So that definitely does happen. Probably, but this is one of the kind of rationales behind putting people in prison, right? Give them a chance to rehabilitate. Deterrence, right? Deterrence is the second one. If people are scared of the idea of going to prison, maybe they're less likely to actually commit crimes at the end of the day, right? So it's a deterrent. Revenge for illegal acts. You hear this, I think. Did my microphone just die? Oh, dang it. Probably the battery. I can yell really loud. I have a big voice, but it's going to hurt later. And then I lose my voice. Or I could just change this battery. Hello? Hello? Yeah. Nice. Oh, you know what's the worst thing? Is U of A still has drawers full of AA batteries. Instead of like finding some rechargeable system that you could just plug the mic in, we're forced to like destroy the earth with AA alkali batteries. It's kind of awesome. And let's go through thousands of them a year. Right, your congressman. Okay, so revenge for illegal acts, right? Anytime you hear the language from people that ultimately, the reason that we need to put people in prison is so that they get to pay their debt to society, you're in the realm of revenge for illegal acts, right? This idea of paying your debt to society is very much that kind of idea. Okay, and the last one, incapacitation, right? If you're in prison, you cannot go and commit more crimes. So we need to incapacitate you and basically stop you from committing crime, right? And that's one of the other rationales for imprisonment. Okay. So sorry, I'm like, I always mean to take this one out, actually, because this is a weird kind of slide and a weird kind of concept. Okay, so when we talk about crime, right, a lot of times one of the things that happens in society is that people get really afraid that crime is going on because it's presented certain ways in the media, right? And the media has this particular sort of adage that runs the media business, right? That it goes something like this. If it bleeds, it leads, right? So you lead with stories that are the most violent. Why? Because they're good news and they get lots of people to tune in. Now, this has led in a lot of cases to the media kind of ginning up what are called moral panics, right? Where they basically distort crime. Youth crime gets this a lot of the time, right? Where especially youth gangs get presented in a very kind of critical way. And like they're a real threat to society. Society is falling apart because youth crime is out of control. And the media sort of plays this up, and you get a sort of moral panic, and then people demand politicians do something about it. Politicians pass laws, and then people are punished harshly. It's a whole thing. Go take Youth Crime in Society with Brian Hogeveen, SOS 321, and he'll tell you all about how this cycles through in media representations. I'm going to say this top part. I'm going to say let's not worry about these because people always get these confused. So I was meaning to take these out and I forgot this here. But yeah, I mean, when we talk about kind of how the media distorts crimes, you can talk about the level of coverage, like how much coverage they give, like how much priority they give to it, the type of coverage, right? Is it hard news reporting or soft news reporting? Soft news reporting where they talk to the victims, families and stuff, that tends to play really well on emotions, right? And tends to drive more panic. And then the nature of coverage, this is more, the nature of coverage. I'm trying to remember this one. This is why I always want to take it out. The nature of coverage has more to do with the kind of language that's used, right? How are things depicted? But I'm not going to put these on the exam because I don't like this particular way of categorizing this. So let's just move on from that. People always get them confused, and it's always, it's always a problem. Okay. So who benefits from it? Because they're very similar and they're hard to distinguish. All right. So who benefits from moral panics, right? Mass media, right? If it bleeds, it leads is all about getting eyeballs, right? So if there's a lot of violent crime coverage, you're going to tend to get a lot of people tuning in. Police and the criminal prevention industry, right? Police will often play up how dangerous streets are in order to get more funding, right? Especially from cities. Prison construction maintenance firms, firearms manufacturers, right? When there's a reported spike in crime, people go buy more guns, especially if you're in the United States, right? The criminal justice system, more job security due to more spending, especially in the kind of prison industrial complex, and politicians, right? Especially conservative politicians, for whatever reason, often adopt. You can hear it in Pierre Poilievre, right now. He's talking hard on crime approaches. Why? Because whole careers in politics have been made on, we're too soft on crime, so let's ultimately punish crime more, make society safer. And if people are feeling really unsafe, basically that can be a good way to boost your political fortunes. All right, last one. So capital punishment, actually, some people will argue capital punishment is really effective. The death penalty, ranks high as a form of revenge, but it doesn't really work as a form of deterrent, especially for crimes like murder, right? Why? Because, we think of like NCIS as the model for how people commit murder, right? You planned it and you froze the bullet with liquid nitrogen and then you fired it and it killed the person and then the bullet melted so there was no evidence, haha. Most people actually commit murder quite impulsively, right? You catch your wife sleeping with someone and you beat him to death with a golf club that was in your closet is more the typical. I've painted a picture for you. That's the more typical picture of murder, right? Not planned and premeditated, more you're sleeping with my wife, I'm going to kill you. Or something like that, right? I'm tired of you asking me for a sandwich, so I poisoned you with drain cleaner, right? This is, more the type of murders that tend to happen. Or just gang-on-gang violence, right? You're on my turf, you pushed my brother, and I'm going to kill you, right? This is more typical of murder. And so if people aren't planning to kill people, it's hard to be like, well, if I kill Joe, I might get the death penalty, right? People are not being rational, so you can't have rationalistic kind of deterrences. Okay, and in recent years, analysts have suggested two main reforms to the prison system, reconsidering our stance on rehabilitation, right? Why? And keeping people out of prison. Why? Because, we get a lot of recidivism from putting people in prisons where they interact with other prisoners, right? And it could be reduced through, more education and job training so that when people get out, they have alternatives to committing more crime, right? One of the ideas is, people might be committing crimes because they're understrained, they don't have great opportunities. If you could get them better opportunities and maybe take care of some of their problems, if they have legacies of abuse, sexual abuse, or substance abuse, right? If you could treat that, you could make their lives better. But yeah, any attempts to reduce rather than increase the number of incarcerated offenders. Why? Because the more people you put in prison, the more they tend to cycle through, and the longer they're in, the more serious their crime becomes. Okay, is moral panic just fear-mongering? Basically, just that it happens at a societal level. Okay, all right, how much time do I have left? 8 minutes. All right, well, there's too much to do to let you go. So I'm going to go back here. You can't see what I'm doing because I'm still in PowerPoint. And I'm just going to, because I have globalization ready to go. We're going to start a couple slides on globalization. We'll continue next time. Assuming this will download. It's a 112 megabyte file. This would work much better if my laptop was working and I hadn't spent 8 minutes trying to get my laptop working. But nevertheless. Okay. Give me half a second here and I will get this running. And we'll do a few minutes on globalization and kind of go from there. The slides are up on eClass now. I put them there just before I came to class. Please download faster. For all the money these people spend on tuition, we should have faster internet. What's that?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Pretty sure the internet hasn't been upgraded in 20 years. Oh, please. Only 2 more megabytes. There we go. All right. And hopefully I will bring all my adapters next time. Okay. Globalization. Ta-da. I'll get this running on my laptop in a sec. Oh, a little movie. How long is it? It is too long for this, but we'll watch a little bit. We'll finish it next time. This will be our intro to globalization. We'll go from here. Of course, if the sound worked, that would be better. Okay. You know what? I'm thwarted today by technology that sucks. All right. Well, I'll do that next time. I'll just wait. I'll start with I'll do some concepts and we'll do the video next time when I get my laptop working. Just give me half a sec. All right. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties today. Okay. So, globalization one more time. Nope. All right. I love you computers at U of A. You're so good. I was playing as the guy in the video. Actually, I never thought of that. Okay, so we're going to start on globalization, right? Okay, so when we talk about globalization, right, we're talking really about the shrinking of the world in major ways, right? Principally through, in the post-war period, through a couple of things, right? Communications technologies going from, radio, the telegraph, pre-war, the phone, radios, television, satellites, and eventually the internet, right? So increasingly, we're in what sometimes has been referred to by people as a global village. And they take this term from a Canadian scholar named Marshall McLuhan, right? Okay, so the world is becoming a much smaller place really since like the end of the 1980s, right, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? So today, and I mean really prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the world was a very open place, right, and a very increasingly interconnected one, right? Fewer countries were requiring visas. It was easier to move funds around, right? Like you could go to an ATM in London, anytime I've been out of the country, instead of getting cash before I go, I just go to an ATM, when I get to the airport and get a bunch of local currency out, and it takes it out of my bank account in at TD Bank. And increasingly the spread of North American and American business practices, things like supermarkets, big box stores, fast food restaurants, and the like. And increasingly, right, the world's been made smaller by English sort of becoming the global language, right? English is sometimes referred to as the lingua franca now. There are more non-native English speakers in the world than there are, bless you, English speakers. I freaked someone out in one of my other classes because they were watching online. Someone sneezed in class and I said, bless you. And they were like, how did you know? Okay. So what is globalization, right? Basically, principally, it's the spread of capitalism to more and more parts of the globe following the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? So the Soviet Union falls apart at the end of the night. Well, essentially, starts to fall apart in about 1989. The process is completed by 1991, and the world kind of opens up, and capitalism spreads out, basically to most parts of the globe outside of, say, Afghanistan and North Korea and a few other places. Right, so basically, and increasingly what happens, more free trade agreements are signed and countries become more interdependent on each other, right? It becomes easier to move money around, moving capital, commodities, culture, and people across national borders. But there's a downside as well. Increasingly, in the period of globalization, people have started talking about the growth of kind of global inequality and the rise of things like the super rich, right? The Elon Musks and the Bill Gates of the world don't really exist prior to globalization. Globalization, you end up with people who are massively, massively wealthy and people who are desperately, desperately poor in some ways. There's also fears with globalization, and this is one, I've got my, my picture of Coca-Cola forcing the earth to drink Coke, that local cultures and natural environment are hurt by globalization. So the natural environment, right, obviously here we're thinking of things like climate change and increased pollution, but cultures, people have been afraid that globalization hurts local cultures as well. Because, Hollywood has moved in, right, you can watch an Avengers film in Beijing, and it pushes out local cultures, right? People don't want to see the local Chinese or Russian or French movies. They want to see the big budget American films, and it makes it harder to have unique kind of national cultures. So this is sometimes referred to as processes like McDonald'sization, right? The spread of McDonald's everywhere, and especially American food culture everywhere, much lamented by the French. Although frankly, a controversial statement, I found the food in Paris to be very mid. And outside of like the really ritzy areas, the food wasn't that good. I know. I just got banned from ever going to France again, but that's okay. And McDonald's occasionally in France was a nice treat because it was something recognizable. I'm like, I think those are snails. I'm going to go to McDonald's instead. The French. My favorite term here is Coca-Colonization because it sounds cool and it's fun to say. Americanization, or more commonly now called cultural imperialism. And yeah, I'll end with this. Some anti-globalization activists view globalization as a form of imperialism, basically economic domination of countries by another one, now done without armies mostly, but done through purely economic means. Okay, I will attempt to get my laptop working for next time so we can do this a little bit more smoothly. Thanks for your patience. We'll see you on Friday. Alrighty. What's going on here? Shows up there. Oh no, that's that one. Okay. Just give me half a sec to close some of this stuff down, and then I will be right with you.
So I don't know how to go about it.
Fair enough. It's not really that big of a deal. We can make it work pretty easily. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know about the accommodations for 3 midterms on one day.